Welcome back. Hope we took some lessons from Chanukah. Special time. Chanukah has a lot of spiritual inspiration. Chanukah, especially because the Greeks wanted us to forget Hashem, even though they didn't mind if we learned Torah, but they wanted us to forget that Hashem taught us the Torah. It's Hashem's Torah. Hashem it's godly. They wanted us to forget Hashem's mitzvahs. They didn't mind if we do the mitzvahs so much as they wanted us to forget Hashem. So now that we're learning Torah, we have to see the godliness in the Torah. That's, I guess, one of the important messages of Chanukah. If we don't want the Greeks to win, we got to make sure that we learn Torah not as a intellectual study, but as a godly study, as a studying Hashem's Torah. This is a very spiritual moment and a special opportunity that Hashem allows us to connect with Him. So the Gemara that we were learning before mentioned about the laws of slaves being exempt, just like women are exempt from going to the Beis Hamikdash for the 3 holidays. So it said that slaves are also exempt. And the Gemara seemed to have a back and forth. Is it learned from a pasuk, or do we know that slaves are obligated in mitzvahs just like women? And the initial answer the Gemara gave is, how do we know that the slaves are exempt from going to the Beis Hamikdash? So the pasuk says, ha'adoin, the master. You have to, 3 times a year, all males shall appear before the master. And a slave has more than one master. And being that he has more than one master, he's excluded, because the verse implies only if you have one master, which means Hashem. Someone that has more than one master would be excluded because of that pasuk. But then the Gemara says, well, what do we need a pasuk for? I thought any mitzvah that women are obligated in, a slave is obligated in. And any mitzvah that a woman is not obligated in, a slave is not obligated in, because we learn a teaching from a Gzeira Shava. So the Gemara's conclusion is, you're right. You actually do learn that a slave is only obligated in mitzvahs that a woman is obligated in. And the reason for this exemption in the Mishnah about a slave is not talking about a regular slave. It's talking about a half slave and a half, someone who's half a slave, half free. And that's what the pasuk is exempting. I should mention that it's an interesting discussion in the commentaries about the exemption of a slave, or how do we understand the permit that a slave is exempt from the mitzvahs? Is it, the way it works is, once you buy this slave, you have to circumcise him, and he has to go to the mikvah. Now, this slave, he's not allowed to marry a Jewish woman, which we've spoken about, but we know he's obligated in mitzvahs that a woman is obligated in. Does that obligation, what would we have done if not for the verse that tells us that a slave is obligated in mitzvahs like a woman? What would we assume? Would we assume that the slave is obligated in all mitzvahs? And then the verse, the Gzeira Shava, this way of teaching, this expounding upon the laws of a woman to teach us the laws of a slave, does that now exempt the slave from doing all the mitzvahs? And we'll say, you know what? He's not obligated in all mitzvahs. We have a teaching that tells us he's only obligated in women's mitzvahs. Or is it the opposite? A slave, he went to the mikveh, he did his circumcision, but he's not obligated yet in any mitzvahs. Comes along the teaching and tells us, no, you think he's exempt? No, he's actually obligated, not in all mitzvahs, but he's obligated in the mitzvahs of a woman. So again, is the verse coming to exempt him from all the men's mitzvahs, or is it coming to obligate him in all the women's mitzvahs? This is a discussion in the commentaries, the simple way of learning, it would seem, is that he is. We would assume that the slave is exempt, but because we have a teaching from a verse that compares him to a woman slave, comparing a slave to a woman, so we say that he's obligated in women's mitzvahs. So in other words, the teaching gives a new obligation to the slave. The slave initially would be exempt. But there is another way of learning, that really the slave would be obligated in all mitzvahs, and the verse comes to be to give an exemption to him. So again, what is the verse teaching us? Is it teaching us an obligation, or is it teaching us an exemption? What would we have assumed without this teaching? Would we have assumed without this teaching that a slave is obligated in all mitzvahs? So the verse comes and exempts him from all mitzvahs and says, no, you're only obligated in women's mitzvahs? Or is it the opposite, that the slave is really obligated in all mitzvahs, and the verse is coming and saying, no, you're not really obligated in all mitzvahs. You're only obligated in women's mitzvahs. So again, you have these two ways of learning. Now, yes, Robert.
Yes, the question for me is, the categorizing both women and slaves together. What is the implication of that?
So the Torah does mention a word regarding the women, and it mentions the same word regarding a slave. So the Gemara says that's called the Gezerah Shava, that whatever laws we have by one, we follow the laws by the other. So when it comes to a slave, it's obviously vague what laws they are obligated in. So since we have clarity about a woman's mitzvahs, that women have certain mitzvahs they're obligated in and certain mitzvahs they're not, so the Gemara says we're going to compare a slave to the woman. But the question was, is the slave being exempted by this teaching, or is he being obligated by this teaching? In other words, what would we have assumed without this? The fact that it says a word, it's called, the word that it says is law. It says the word law here, and it says the word law there. So we compare the laws by each. Now, one of the commentaries wants to say that this is based on, is the slave considered Jewish once they go to the mikvah the first time? What do we call them? Do we call them a Jew? Of course, they can't marry a Jewish woman, but do we call them a Jew? What category are they in? So the simple understanding is they're not a Jew. They're in an in-between stage. And they're more a goy than a Jew. When they become freed, then they become a Jew. But at this stage, they haven't really become Jewish yet. So because they haven't become Jewish yet, you would assume that they're totally exempt. And then the verse comes and tells you, no, that they're totally exempt, but they're not totally exempt. They have to do mitzvahs like a woman. So they are a little obligated. But initially, we would have assumed they're totally exempt because they're really more of a goy than a Jew. On the other hand, the other opinion might hold that they're really closer to being a Jew than a goy. They've done the circumcision. They've done the mikvah. So really, they're more a Jew than a goy, but they can't marry a Jewish woman. They're not full-fledged yet, and they can't be counted for a minyan, but they are more a Jew than a goy. And you would think that they're obligated in all mitzvahs, and then comes the verse and tells you, no, they're not obligated in all mitzvahs. They're only obligated in mitzvahs like a woman. So it's coming and exempting the slave from all the mitzvahs, because initially this opinion holds that their mikvah in the first place was really a kosher mikvah. It was like it really did the job. It didn't fully do it, and according to this way of learning, there is another mikvah that needs to be done when they get freed. But according to this opinion, that mikvah is only rabbinic. Biblically, that they wouldn't need to do that extra mikvah. The other way of learning was that they're totally not Jewish yet. And they did the mikvah and they did the circumcision, but they're really not Jewish yet. And according to that way of learning, the next mikvah that they do when they get freed, that actually makes them Jewish. That mikvah is a biblical obligation. So there's these two opinions seem to go hand in hand. In other words, if you hold that it's the second mikvah is a biblical obligation, then you hold that they're really not Jewish yet. And if they're not Jewish yet, then that would mean that they are exempt from all mitzvahs. And then the verse comes and teaches us that they are obligated in some mitzvahs. But if you learn that they are really more Jewish than not Jewish, then you would say that they're really obligated in all mitzvahs, and the verse comes along and exempts them from the all mitzvahs and tells them they're only obligated in two mitzvahs. So giving you a little of the discussions about the laws of slaves. There is some noise. Okay. Yehuda, you had a question.
You answered it.
Answered it? Oh, okay. Ben.
Yes. I wanted to ask, a Jewish slave doesn't lose his Jewishness, but
Right.
a non-Jewish slave has a problem becoming Jewish because he's a slave.
Well, that's interesting that you say that a Jewish slave doesn't lose his Jewishness. There is a interesting law about a Jewish slave that if he becomes a slave, his master can give him a non-Jewish maidservant. So maybe he does lose a little of his Jewishness in a certain sense. Obviously, he's still Jewish and he has laws and he has to keep all the laws, but he now is downgraded in a certain sense that he marries a Shifra Canaanist, a Canaanite maidservant. So he does, you worded it that he doesn't lose any of his Jewishness. I'm just saying that wording is an interesting point, a little Canadian.
He's not losing his Jewishness, he's gaining some Goyishness.
Gaining Goyishness, okay. However, I'm just, it is an interesting law. In fact, someone once came to me and said, how could it be that we're going to allow a Jewish man to marry this non-Jewish woman? How could such a thing be? It seems, shocking that you're going to allow, that the Torah is going to allow such a thing. Outright. It's not like after it was done. How could the Torah allow such a thing? And the answer that I gave this person was, well, she's not totally not Jewish. She did go, she is a Shifcha Canaanist. She's partially Jewish. She went to the mikvah already. She's a slave. She's seemingly obligated.
For a Jew, so
she's on her, she's not totally not Jewish, but on the other hand, she really isn't Jewish. She really hasn't, she's maybe left the stage of being Goyish, but she isn't Jewish. It is an interesting question. Obviously the simple answer is that this is what the Torah allows. We don't understand all the laws. That's the simple answer, that this is a Gzeras HaKosav. This is like a special exemption that the Torah gives, even though we don't understand how the Torah could exempt him. One thought that comes to my mind is that this man who sold himself as a slave, which is not the acceptable thing to do, this is not appropriate. No one should sell. And he might have stolen, and because he stole, he got sold as a slave. So this person maybe has to learn a lesson that he's like lowered to marry. Maybe it's meant to make him feel humble that he's marrying someone who a regular Jew shouldn't marry. Maybe that's the idea. Just a thought. But it is an interesting question. Like, how could we permit it? Now, the law of an Eshes Yafas Toar, when a person marries a Jew, a Jewish man marries a non-Jew in war, that case we understand a little, because that's a case of the Torah speaks against the Yetzer Hara, that there's the evil inclination is going to overpower him. He's going to do it anyway. So there we have like an explanation why the Torah is permitting him to marry a non-Jew. Again, there's two permits in the Torah of a Jew marrying a non-Jew. And one of them is the Eshes Yafas Toar, the woman in war, where a captive of war that a man could marry. And that would be an exemption that we understand a little, because the Torah says, it's part of the human nature that you actually wouldn't be able to limit a person in that case because he is going to sin anyway. So the Torah tells us that there are certain limitations that the evil inclination puts on us, and that is that it will overpower him. So the Torah couldn't prohibit that. So the Torah has to permit an Eshes Yefas Toar by a case of war, but by a case of a Jewish slave, an Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave, there it does seem a little surprising that the Torah will permit him to marry this non-Jewish woman who's semi-non, whatever you want to say. She's not full-fledged Jewish. Yes, Ben.
Yeah, I also wanted to say, can a Jew be a slave to a non-Jew?
Yeah, right. The Torah talks about, a person's not supposed to sell themselves to a non-Jew, but the Torah does talk about it.
I see. So the rules are the same?
We're supposed to redeem him and so on, but you're dead over, there's a
community should.
The community, and then it talks about if he gets sold to a Eker Mishpachas Ger, right? If he gets sold to a mishpach, that he gets sold to like an idol or to work for Avodah Zarah, So these are psukim. They're verses in the Torah. I'll tell you where it is. Le'eker.
Okay, I guess it's complicated.
I'll tell you where it is. It's right in I'll tell you what parsha it's in. Le'eker Mishpachas. It's in Vayikra Chafei.
That's the book of Vayikra.
Yeah.
I learned this morning that there's a difference between the book of Vayikra and Vayikra, the parsha.
So it's in Bahar, and it says that so he gets sold to a ger toishav, he gets sold to a non-Jew who's living there. So after he's sold, Geula tihi eloi, echad me'echad yigalenu, it's a mitzvah for someone to redeem him, or his relative, like doidoy ben doidoy yigalenu, mishem mishpachta yigalenu. They should try to redeem him and save him from being save him from being stuck in this situation. And as the pasuk ends, as the later pasuk mentions, Kili b'nei Yisrael avadim, they are my slave. The me are the b'nei Yisrael slaves. Avadaihe, they are mine. They are my slaves that I brought them out of Egypt. I am Hashem, your God. So it's definitely not a good situation. But those are the laws over there. You can look in the end of Parshas Bahar. Okay, so
Rabbi.
Yes, David.
We're saying that a slave has the laws of a woman regarding mitzvahs. Is there any difference between a male slave and a female slave?
So it's interesting that the Rambam says that a male slave does have a prohibition of shaving, and that's a very interesting law that you would think that he wouldn't, because he's only obligated mitzvahs like a woman. A woman has no obligation, no prohibition of shaving, but a man slave does, according to the Rambam, does have a prohibition of shaving. And the way it's the way you have to understand it somehow is that shaving is the reason why a woman is exempt is because it's not part of her physical body. But because a man, in other words, really a woman would be obligated and prohibited from shaving, had the body of a woman be normal to grow a beard. But because a woman's body normally doesn't grow a beard, therefore she doesn't have that prohibition. But in essence, she has the prohibition. Therefore, a man slave would have the same prohibition. But that would mean that a female slave would be exempt from shaving, but a man slave would be obligated would be prohibited from shaving. So that would be one difference between the two. But other than that, I believe they would both be in the same category. If I'm not mistaken, they would both be in the same category: a woman slave and a man slave. Okay, we shall continue. So the Gemara that we're up to is the Gemara about Hachiger v'Asuma v'Choila v'Hazokin, which is a new words in the Mishnah that these are people that are exempt from going to the Beis Hamikdash. And we are on page 4a, all the way on the bottom, 3 lines before the bottom of the page. 4a, all the way on the bottom. V'hachiger v'asuma v'choila v'hazokim. So the chiger is the lame person, the blind person, the sick person, and the zokain, the elderly person. So Tano Rabbana, the rabbis learned that what do we learn from the word regalim, shalosh regalim? So regalim prat lebale kabin. So in this brisa, it mentions that there is one teaching from the word regalim, that's seems to be one opinion, that regalim excludes someone who has a wooden block, I guess, a wooden block, okay, probably. That's placed on his prosthetics. That's placed on his. That's placed over his whatever is remaining of his leg, and he uses this wooden block as a prosthetics to walk with. So such a person, doesn't have 2 feet. He's not regalim, and therefore he would be exempt from going to the Beis Hamikdash for the 3 holidays. So he is exempt because it says regalim. Davar acher, there is another opinion, and that is regalim prat lechiger. That regalim is excluding a few people. Chiger, someone who's lame. He has the foot, but it doesn't. It's paralyzed. Or v'lachoila, someone who's sick. V'lasuma, someone who's blind. V'lazakin, someone who's elderly. V'lasheina yachol alois baraglo, and someone who cannot go to the Beis Hamikdash with their feet. And the Gemara will now try to understand what that means. Someone who can't go. It seems like the other cases are all cases where they can't really go with their feet. For example, someone who is sick maybe doesn't have the energy to go with his feet, or someone who's blind might need someone to help him go with his feet. Someone who's a zakain would probably need, he's just elderly, can't walk so far. What did you say, Isaac? Needs a what? We missed that word. A stick. A stecken. So all of these people would be exempt from going because it says regalim, with their feet. And these people aren't able really to go with their own feet. They would need to help from others and so on. And therefore they would be
What is kabin?
So Baale Kabin was that wooden block, person who's an amputee that has a wooden block.
But apparently they are allowed. It says prat lebaale kabin.
They are exempt. Prat excludes. It excludes them. Right. That only regalim is obligated. But Baale Kabin.
Allowed. It's a question of have to. It's not a question of allowed. If somebody walks with a limp, they're going to let him on Harabayas. The question is, does he have to go through the whole process of going?
Got it, Ben?
Yeah, but I thought maybe kabin is a walking stick.
No. The way Rashi learned before, if you look back on page 3a, we had this already before.
Okay.
It was on 3a, and Rashi over there explained Bali Kabin Tishachoschu Raglehem Nosnu Kav Katan Besof Shoko Benoisnim by Moichin. So they put this kav, this wooden block.
It says amputees then, okay.
Yeah, it's an amputee that has a kav, which is a wooden piece. Okay. So the Gemara here says that these type of people are exempt, but the Gemara says, but what is this? Eina yachalalos beraglo. The she'ena yachalalos beraglo la'asuye mai. Who is that including? In other words, what is this specific exemption meant for? People who can't walk, someone who can't ascend by foot. Who is that? Who is that referring to? So Amar Rava says la'asuye, and now we turn the page 4b. La'asuye mefanki. Mefanki is someone who is very delicate and disgusted with if they have to do things in such a perfect way and like a perfectionist, and mafunak. I don't know what's the best way of translating mafunak, Ben.
Mafunak.
We know.
According to Rashi, is barefoot.
Yeah, no, I'm wondering the literal word. Someone who's like gets disgusted by certain things. So such a person is going to be exempt. And as Ezra says, what we're specifically referring to here is, as Rashi says, that this person, why can't someone who's very disgusted at certain things, he can't go to the Beis HaMikdash? The answer is no. It's a specific type of disgust that this person has, that he can't walk barefoot. In order to go to the Beis HaMikdash, you have to walk barefoot. So this person has never walked barefoot in their life. Wherever they go, they have nice shoes and fancy shoes or whatever, and walking on the harabayas with their without shoes to them would be
Rebbe,
like, yes.
My wife around the house here.
You keep cutting off. I'm sorry.
It's like my wife will not walk around.
You keep. I don't know if it's only me.
It's like my wife will not walk around.
Oh, he's got a loose connection somewhere.
Every single time you repeated it, Isaac.
I have no connection.
Every time you repeated it, we missed that same word that you were trying, the main point. But okay, somehow something about your wife. Yes, I got that.
My wife will not walk around this house without slippers.
Without slippers. Okay. So
Rabbi,
yes,
I found Pinuk is pampered, a pampered person.
Pampered. Okay, all right. So this person would not be obligated to go to the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Because for them, they're not. They're too disgusted by walking. They're too pampered to ever walk without shoes, to walk barefoot. As it says, as it says in the pasuk, when you come to see my face, who asked you to trample on my courtyard? And what that means is that if you're going to wear your shoes, then I really don't want you. And so this person is so used to wherever they go, they always wear their shoes. So they would be exempt from going to the Beis HaMikdash. So just
Rebbe,
like in other words,
about Erev Pesach, when the Gemara describes Erev Pesach, how the Kahanim would walk around in blood up to their ankles, you can understand why a person might feel that way.
Right. That's an interesting point. I don't know that you have to take it that far. That's in other words, it seems that the person, simply by the fact that they are unable to walk even barefoot on this mountain, on this Harabayas, on the special mountain, just walking there, they're not used to doing that barefoot. They're not comfortable, so they would be in a similar category as someone who's lame who can't walk there. Just like someone who's lame can't walk, this person also can't walk. So I'm not disagreeing with you, Isaac, but I'm just saying maybe you don't have to take it so far.
Correct.
Possibly,
Yeah, I understand.
Possibly this person is exempt simply because they are also called unable. Yes, Moshe.
What about during Yom Kippur? We don't wear leather shoes. We wear gym shoes. Is this also connected with this? I mean,
Interesting.
But I mean,
interesting
in
question.
in another way, because I'm.
So Moshe wants to know if you would be allowed to wear non-leather shoes and go to the Beis Hamikdash. And it would seem not. It seems that it's not connected specifically to leather. It would seem that it's anything. You can't have anything, not even socks or anything. You're
Socks would be considered would be like mourning. You wouldn't. So that.
Yeah, but it would seem that it's not. So what about someone who's in mourning? They'd be allowed to go with socks. It seems that that nothing covering their feet. That's why the Kohanim used to be so cold in the Beis Hamikdash. Also, they would have to warm up in the Beis Hamoiked in the room that had a fire because the floor was cold and they were barefoot. Okay, so the Gemara continues and says, so we're including this person who's called a mefuna. Now, Rashi mentions, according to this second view, davar acher, which meant this other opinion, how do they learn about someone who is an amputee? So the Gemara, so Rashi tells us, because if you remember, the Gemara had another pasuk, pe'amim, that they learned from pe'amim, an amputee is exempt. So therefore, they have regalim extra to exclude someone who needs extra help besides their feet. They need like more help. So that would be the way this other opinion also excludes they exclude the amputee from another word called, the word is pa'amim. Okay, so coming back, so now we're on 4b, and we just mentioned this verse that told us that a mefunach is exempt. Now we learn a brisa, Tana, ha'orel, a person who's uncircumcised, v'hatame, and someone who is impure, Peturim and Ari are also exempt from going to the Beis Hamikdash for the holidays. They don't have to go; they're exempt. Bishlem atame, it's good. I understand a tummy person is exempt. Dechsiv, as it says, uvasa shama va'avesam shama. It says, and you should come there, and you should bring v'havesem shama. You should bring there your oiloseichem v'zevchechem, your sacrifices. And so the Gemara compares that you should come there, which is in one verse, and then the next verse, the few words right after these words, it says the next verse, v'havesem shama, you should bring there. So in the end of the verse, in the end of the earlier verse, it ends with you should come there. In the beginning of the next verse says, and you should bring there. So the Gemara says we compare the two things, and we say, kol sheyeshnai b'viyah yeshnai b'hava. Anyone who is included in the rule of coming is included in the rule of bringing. Anyone who's not included in the rule of coming, Einoi Bahava does not bring. So the point is, let me just mute over here. The point is that a person who is Tameh is obviously not supposed to come to the Beis Hamikdash. It's a very terrible sin. The punishment of kares, getting cut off. A person is Mitame, the Beis Hamikdash, makes the Beis Hamikdash, goes into the Beis Hamikdash while he's Tameh. So the obviously he's not able to come to the Beis Hamikdash, but if he doesn't come to the Beis Hamikdash, he's not obligated to come to the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara here says that he's also not going to be obligated to send a korban, because only if he's yeshnai b'viyah, if he's included in the rule of coming to the Beis Hamikdash, yeshnai b'hava, he would be included in the rule of bringing the korban which is the carbon oilas re'iyah, this burnt sacrifice, so he would be obligated in bringing it. But if he's not included in the rule of coming to the Beis Hamikdash, he would not be included in the rule of bringing the oilas re'iyah, the sacrifice, either. So we now see that a tameh is exempt from re'iyah. In other words, not only from coming, but he's exempt from bringing the sacrifice or having someone bring the sacrifice. But an arel manolan, but how do we know an arel is exempt from coming or in bringing the sacrifice? So Rashi over here mentions the pasuk. He says, he brings the exact verse that it says that a person who's tameh is not allowed to come to the Beis Hamikdash. If he does, he gets the punished by being cut off, meaning that he will pass away before the age of 60, and his children will also pass away. So that's someone who on purpose enters the Beis Hamikdash when he is tameh, when he is impure. So the Gemara asks, what about an arel? How do we know manolan, arel manolan? How do we know the arel is exempt from bringing this sacrifice? Now the arel is uncircumcised. Now I will tell you that Rashi mentions what is the meaning of this? Someone is uncircumcised. So Rashi explains that he's uncircumcised because his siblings passed away from circumcision. When they did a circumcision on his siblings, they died. There's some sickness that you can't stop the bleeding. Forget what it's called, but it's some
hemophilia.
Hemophilia. Okay.
Hemophilia.
Hemophilia. So his brothers had that. They assume he has it as well. And the thing is that since his brothers passed away already from it, so he is not meant to be circumcised because it's a question of life and death. And circumcision is not one of those mitzvahs that a person supposed that you're supposed to give up your life for. And therefore, he didn't do the circumcision. He doesn't have the circumcision, and which automatically the Gemara here is saying he is going to now be exempt from bringing this carbon in the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says, Arel Manolan, Hamani Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara says, you know who this ruling goes like that's exempting an Arel, someone who's uncircumcised? This is Rabbi Akiva, the Marbi La'arel Katame, who includes a Arel just like someone who's impure. An Arel is someone who's uncircumcised, and he's considered similar to someone impure, the Tanya, because we learned in a Brisa, Rabbi Akiva says, Ish, it says, any man who's a Tameh, Metzaira, Zav, all different types of impurities. Metzaira means he has leprosy. Zav is a certain impurity that's applicable to men. They have an emission that is not a normal emission, but it's some type of a sickness that would make them tameh. It's called a zav. And that verse mentions ish. It mentions twice the word ish, that any person who's a kohen, and it uses ish instead of just saying ish. It says it twice. So the Gemara says, you know what that's including? The rabbi says ha'arel, that includes an uncircumcised individual, that someone who's uncircumcised is similar to a person with leprosy or a person that's a zav. So in other words, someone uncircumcised is in the same category, and basically if he's considered like he's tameh, he's considered like he's impure, so he would be exempt from bringing this carbon, and so that would be the source that our Gemara is looking for. What is the source of an Arel being exempt? It's from this teaching of Rabbi Akiva that an uncircumcised person is equal, is the same law of someone who is tameh, impure.
So, question.
Yeah.
So, suppose that, lo aleinu, the individual is a Kohen, and he's lost brothers because of this hemophilia. So he would be exempt from actually doing anything at all in the Beit HaMikdash.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that he would probably not be allowed to enter either, according to this, because he's like Tameh. So not only he's not obligated to bring the korban, it would seem that he maybe is exempt as well from coming, and maybe not even allowed to come to the Beis Hamikdash either. So yeah, he would not be doing the work of the Beis Hamikdash. Just like someone who has a mum, someone who's blemished doesn't do the work in the Beis Hamikdash. So that would be the same in the same situation.
Rabbi,
Yes, Moshe.
Rabbi,
Yes.
what about a Balkari? Because right now in a Beit Knesset, a Balkari is allowed to carry out certain functions, in the tefillah. So what about a Balkari? I mean, Tzav and Balkari are two different things, aren't they?
Yeah, you know what? I have to look at it. You want to know if a Balkari is permitted to go to the Beis Hamikdash? So
Right.
I don't remember the laws exactly, but I'm sure he's not. He's Tameh. But if he goes to the mikvah right away, then he becomes a Tvul Yoim, and if he's a Tvul Yoim, at least it minimizes his tuma that he would not be in the full category. Let me just mute everyone here 1 second. Okay. If he's a Tvul Yoim, so he can't eat truma even if he's a Tvul Yoim. He would have to wait for Herav Shemesh, it's called, for the night to come, and Seis HaKerchavim, the dusk, and then he would be allowed to eat truma. And the next day he could bring korbanos. Well, it depends what type of tumah he is. A keri, maybe he doesn't have that type of tumah. So it would seem that he would have to wait till the night in order to be able to do the avodah in Beis Hamikdash. But I should look it up just to double check. But that if I remember correctly, that would be the law of a Balkari. Okay, so so the Gemara. Oh, so I did want to mention one thing about what Ezra asked. Teves has a different view over here than Rashi, and Teves doesn't agree with this strictness that we have just because this person has hemophilia. He is a oines. He's not a person who willingly didn't circumcise himself. He's someone who's not able to circumcise himself. So Teves seems to have a more lenient view because Teves says that's not what we talk about when we say Arel. When we talk about an Arel, we're talking about someone who's afraid of being circumcised. And so because he's afraid of being circumcised, he's chosen not to circumcise. Again, he's not amazing. He's not doing it on purpose, not circumcising himself. He's afraid. He doesn't like to see blood. He doesn't want to have surgery. So he doesn't want to be circumcised. And in that situation, he is the person who the Gemara talks about. That's an Arel that doesn't bring the korban. He's exempt from these korbanos. But the person who is uncircumcised because he can't circumcise himself because it's the question of life and death, Tesis says that person is not what we're referring to when we say he's uncircumcised. He's called an Einus. He has no choice. So these are the two ways of learning our Gemara with regard to who the RL that we're talking about is. Is it a person who's unable to circumcise himself? And even him, according to Rashi, even him, he's exempt and he doesn't bring these korbanos. And according to Tesis, no, we're talking about someone who is has decided not to do his bris milah because he's afraid. In Tesis language, he says, doyeg machmas hatzar. He's afraid of the pain. But if it's mesu echov machmas milah, but if his brothers passed away because of the bris, that's called an einus, havi einus. And so that is basically an argument here of how to explain the word arel here, the uncircumcised person. So we've just concluded that an arel is, according to Rebbe Kiva, is like a tameh, and he is exempt from Re'iyah. The next Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanon, we have a brisa, another brisa, because the first one is also brisa. We had a brisa earlier, Aral and Tami is Paturim and Ariyah. So now the Gemara brings another brisa, Tame Patur min Ariyah. So again, it mentions that the Tame person is exempt from this Karban Riyah. The Chsiv, as it says, Uvasa Shama Vahavesam Sham. It says that you shall come there and you shall bring there. Bring there means bringing sacrifices. Coming there is referring to going to the Azara, to the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. So since these two, there are two verses and words, 4 words that are right next to each other in the Torah. So the Gemara says you have to compare the two, as we just saw earlier. Kol sheyeshnai b'viyah, anyone that's included in the category of coming to the Beis HaMikdash, yeshnai b'hava is also included in the category of bringing to the Beis HaMikdash the sacrifice. So what would that mean? A tummy person is not able to come to the Beis HaMikdash; he is impure. So the same thing would apply to a tummy person bringing the sacrifice. It would be exempt from sending the sacrifice because he is not obligated to come there. So if he's not obligated to come, the Gemara says the verse juxtaposes these two statements. So he's exempt from coming there as well. Rabbi Yochanan ben Davoy, I remember Mishum Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yochanan ben Davoy says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, Suma beyachas meyeinov patur min ariyah. A blind person, only in one eye, he is exempt from coming to the Beis HaMikdash. Shenemar, as it says, and here, this is a Gemara really that we learned earlier, and it repeats itself. The reason why it repeats itself here is because this is really the source of the Gemara. In the earlier Gemara that we had, this was only mentioning it as a side point, and it had to do with the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said, see, it's important to remember. We got to remember what we learned earlier. Mishnah had said, "Kol chayavin b'riyah." Everyone is obligated to go to the Beis HaMikdash 3 times a year. And the Gemara said, "What do you mean everyone is obligated? Why does it have to tell us that everyone is obligated? Just tell us who's exempt." You know, and the Mishnah makes a whole big statement of everyone is obligated. It must be including someone that you might think is exempt. And so the Gemara says, who is that including? When it says everyone is obligated, everyone is obligated, who is it including? So the Gemara had 2 final explanations. One of them was asuma, ba'achas mein, blind in one eye, that the Mishnah is saying, someone's blind in one eye, he is obligated to come to the Beis HaMikdash, right? And that was one, if I remember correctly, that was the first page, where that was one conclusion, that la'asuye suma be'achas mi'enov, to include this person who's blind in one eye. So the Gemara there said, and by the way, this doesn't fit with one of the Tanoim. Who is that Tana that it doesn't fit with? Yochanan ben Dahavoy, right? That this opinion, Yochanan ben Dahavoy, who says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, he says that person is exempt. But the Mishnah, our Mishnah, one way of learning our Mishnah was that our Mishnah says he's obligated. Now, why would he be obligated? Why would someone who's blind be obligated to go into the Beis HaMikdash? Why not? Just because you're blind, you're going to be exempt? You're blind in one eye? It's only one eye. He's not really blind. So he should be obligated to go into the Beis HaMikdash. But there is an opinion that says no. And this opinion would actually not fit with our Mishnah, the way we explained our Mishnah, the way one way we explained our Mishnah, because this opinion holds he's exempt, actually. Blind in one eye. Well, why? Why should he be exempt? I could understand someone who's fully blind maybe is exempt from mitzvahs. It's almost impossible for him to fulfill the mitzvahs without help from other people. Maybe he could be exempt. But a blind person is, reason to say he might be exempt from mitzvahs. But someone who's only blind in one eye, why would he be exempt? So the Gemara there earlier mentioned that we have a word in the Torah. It says Yera'eh, but Yera'eh is spelled as if it says Yira. So the Gemara makes a drasha. It says, and there were two ways of learning this drasha. We had Rashi's way and Tosfos's way, that it's Yira Yera'eh or Yera'eh Yira. But however you learned it, you basically came to the conclusion that just like Hashem basically Hashem sees you with both of his eyes, with full vision, so you also have to have full vision, and that's learned from the fact that it's Yera'eh and Yira, that there's two words that we compare the two and say, just like Hashem sees you with his full vision, so also you have to see Hashem with your full vision, so to speak. And if you're blind in one eye, you would be exempt from this mitzvah. So that's why this opinion, Rabbi Yochanan ben Davai, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, would say someone who's blind in one eye is exempt. So let's read it inside. Rabbi Yochanan ben Davai, Yamim Shem Rabbi Yehuda, Suma Bachs Meina Patam and Ariya, someone who's blind in one eye is exempt from going to the Beis Hamikdash for the three holidays. Shenemar, as it says, Yira Yera'eh. It says Yira, well, the way it's read is Yira. It says the letters are Yira. So we say Kederach Shabbat Leroy's Kach Ba Leroy's. Or another way of reading it is Kederach Shabbat Leroy's Kach Ba Leroy's. Yeah, yes, Ezra.
I'm going to ask something very controversial, and
Okay.
that is, if to say, Hashem is perfect in all ways, so he wants only people that are perfect in all ways to come to see him. Which means that anyone who has any kind of a blemish or any kind of, whatever, can't come.
Lacking in anything.
So it's an interesting question that you're pointing out an interesting point. Like anyone with a mum, and any animal with a mum can't be, any animal that has a blemish can't be sacrificed. A kohen that has a mum doesn't serve in the Beis Hamikdash, and these people are exempt. Many people are exempt from coming now, but there's really a difference. There's the concept of working in the Beis Hamikdash or being brought as a sacrifice, and there's a concept of being obligated in coming. So these are, you have to draw the line. You have to see it's a big difference. Working in the Beis Hamikdash, it's not honorable for a king to have people working there that aren't perfect, that aren't an honor to him. And same thing as a sacrifice. You don't give something that's blemished as a gift, even though on the one hand it shows your love for that animal. It's blemished. It's weak. It's this. We should really have mercy and pity on this animal that has a blemish, and truthfully so deserves our pity, and we should feel for this animal if it's in pain or has a blemish. But it's not an honorable thing to give as a gift. Doesn't mean you shouldn't spend time and money and help the animal and heal it and whatever. But the thing is, it's not an honor to Hashem, and you wouldn't give it as a gift to your governor. So you also wouldn't give it as a gift to Hashem. At least that's the term used in the pasuk. And so, Hakrivehu no lepechosecha. The pasuk says, it's a pasuk in the Tanakh. It says, would you bring this lepechosecha to your governor? So just like you wouldn't bring it to your governor, you don't bring it as a gift to Hashem. And it doesn't mean that Hashem doesn't love it. It means that it's not an honor when you give that as a gift. You know what it's like when someone comes to your house and they bring you a bottle of the cheapest, cheapest wine possible, or the cheapest flowers that they bought at the 99-cent store. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, fine. But it's a little. Imagine if it's broken. Imagine if something, they give you something broken. It's just not a little below. Better they shouldn't bring something. But but the thing is that working in the Beis Hamikdash is also similar. Working in the Beis Hamikdash, the same thing. It's just not an honor for the king in his palace to have someone who's has different blemishes that they're working there. Now, on the other hand, the cases that we're talking about are people that have limitations. They're handicapped. So the Torah is saying you're not obligated to come to bring these korbanos. You're lame. You're this person is an amputee. Is this. So he's not obligated to come, but it's not saying he's not allowed to come. This is a different story. Now to come to Beis Hamikdash and see Hashem, we're exempting him, but we're not saying he's not allowed to come and Hashem doesn't love him. That's a whole different story. So I don't know if that answers what you were, but I think that was the point you were bringing out. And I just wanted to clarify that there's a difference here. Does that answer you a little, or Ezra, or not really?
I don't know. I'm looking at all these things. You're exempting a person who has this or a person who has that, etc. So I'm looking at all all of this in totality, and the aspect that I'm saying is that if you are not perfect, you can't come to the Beit HaMikdash.
Right. So it's not you can't. It's that you're exempt. We're exempting them, and most of these cases are cases where it's complicated for them to come. Now, the case of vision in one eye is a very surprising law. And as I mentioned earlier, not everyone seems to agree with this. In fact, the main Mishnah, which is a stam, which would be like a stam Mishnah in our Mishnah, where it says Hakol Chayav and Bereiyah, could be arguing on this statement about the blind in one eye. So it would basically be like this is a one person view, and it's based on a teaching of that he expounds on a certain word, which not necessarily is it the accepted halacha. I guess we could look it up what the Rambam paskins this way or not. But the thing is that it's not. It could be it's a gzeras hakasuv, like it's it's not like understandable. Just the fact is, this is one of those exemptions that it's not based on necessarily on logic. It's a gzeras. It's just the Torah made a certain rule. So this one we don't necessarily understand. But again, it's not the opinion of everyone, and it's very possible that we don't even paskin like this view. Yes, Robert.
Oh, Ben was first. Go ahead.
Ben. I didn't.
Ben, go ahead.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to ask because my understanding is if you can't see with both eyes, you can't come.
You
But
can't
also,
come.
And you're patur.
You're
And
patur.
also,
Okay, that's exempt.
If you can't be seen with two eyes, it's the same thing they say, is also patur. In other words, whether you can see with one eye and you're going to be seen with one eye, neither way is allowed.
Yeah, but Hashem has two eyes.
I understand. But Hashem has two legs and you can come some way. If your legs are not perfect, you can still come up.
Right, because it doesn't say,
Yeah.
yay lay.
If your vision is not perfect, you can still come up.
Yeah, because the verse that we're learning it from is Yira Yera'eh. It's on vision. So it's talking about Hashem's vision and your vision. It's comparing your vision and Hashem's vision. And we say, so to speak, Hashem's like sees you with two eyes or whatever. That's of course a euphemism or just imagining that Hashem sees full vision would be a better term.
Anthropomorphism.
Yeah, but the idea is that the same way Hashem sees you, that's how you are seen. That's how you see Hashem.
But I'm saying you can still see with one eye.
Yeah, but how does Hashem see you? The Gemara is expounding on this word Yira Yera'eh, which mentions that if Hashem sees you with both eyes, you should do that. You also are obligated if you have the same level as Hashem. So it's not saying if you can see with one eye, and Hashem could see with one eye. It means that the way Hashem sees you, that's how you see. That's how you see Hashem. Then you're obligated.
That's how you should see Hashem.
Yeah, and that's the type of situation who's obligated. That's
Rabbi.
the type of person who's obligated to come. I'm sorry. Yeah, someone
But are
keeps.
you allowed to come even if you're not obligated?
Yeah, of course.
Rabbi.
I mean, but that's the point, and I'm sympathetic with Ezra, is that, you know, when we read Talmud, it's very specific of what you can and cannot do. And if we interpret it exempt being forbidden, and it's not forbidden, all right? So therefore, you have the opportunity of doing that. So I rather look at it positively than negatively. That's all.
Right. So now I will put a qualification to that, and that is that a tamei person, even though he's exempt, he's also not allowed to come. Someone who's impure, but a
Right.
person who
Well,
is
that's a different
blemished,
category. But that's a different category.
right? But someone
Yeah.
who's blemished and they come, you know, they're allowed to come. Yes,
Right.
Mordechai.
Yes, before you gave the marshal of going to somebody's house and bringing them the cheapest bottle of wine, that's what actually got Cain in trouble. It said, the Medrash says that he gave like the most inferior of his flocks.
Right. Right.
Rabbi.
Listen, I'm not, you know, in a time of famine or something, you know, it's one thing, or, you know, but there's someone who likes that, you know, it's one thing. Just like you go to the 99-cent store, you buy the, you know, they get married and you buy them a thing of pens or something. So from the 99-cent store, you know, for their wedding, their new house that they moved into, you know, they should have some 99-cent pens, you know. But anyway, yeah, so sometimes it's better not to give a gift, you know. It's
So